Thank you so very much. What a blessing to be here. Hollywood, Hollywood, Hollywood. No, I'm fine, no, man. Very much so. And our elderly brothers and sisters of Sunset Hall, long distance runners, struggling for justice for a long time and still making their contribution in their own distinctive and unique way. And I must say, just against the backdrop of these majestic hills of Hollywood, for someone from New Jersey, it's hard to take in. Can you hear me in the back all right? Last but not least, I do want to acknowledge my dear brother Roy Hurst, who I speak to every week for the last 2 years on the Tabitha Smiley Show. I'd never seen him in the flesh, but I finally saw him. He's in the corner. Raise your hand, my brother. Young brother, brilliant brother. I think, Roy, you're too much for the electricity. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming out on this lovely evening. I look forward to our conversation together. I appreciate that, brother. But even as we define what it is, that we do it together. It's a democratic process. I don't believe that any one of us have any monopoly on truth, capital T, or goodness, capital G, beauty, capital B, even though I see some beautiful folk out there, you serious candidates, but let's say beauty, small b, and you on the cutting edge in that regard. But in all seriousness, I've come to Hollywood to say something to unsettle you, to unnerve you, maybe even for a moment unhouse you, because I do not believe that we could talk about the depths of the crisis of not just American democracy and not just the limitations of the American empire, but to keep our focus as well on those Franz Fanon called the wretched of the earth. That we attempt to look at our present situation through the lens of those who have been subjugated, rendered invisible, and yet are indispensable for the revitalization of the American democratic project that can actually shatter the worst of the American empire, that can have positive impact on brothers and sisters in Africa and Asia and Latin America, across the globe. So from the very beginning, I want to start on a Socratic note. Let the helicopters fly even when you're invoking a Socratic note. Yeah, you'll be all right, yeah. What I was saying was we have to do something that cuts radically against the American grain, which is muster the courage to think critically for ourselves. That America's a market-driven business civilization that preoccupied with a mainstream that tries to render most of us into sleepwalkers. And Socratic energy is about mustering the courage to raise some very, very difficult and painful questions about America's past and present in order to accent the best of America's past for the future, and especially the precious children. I think I'm so glad to see the young gifts of heaven here. It's so nice to have children when you're having a discussion about democracy, so that the dialogue doesn't become so abstract and far-fetched that it's not connected to the future. Young folk, 100% of the future. And it affects how you go about your argument and vision when you hear a young child cry every once in a while. You see, because democratic process ought to be a little tainted, as it were, with, in fact, what we're fighting for. And especially those, many of us willing to live and die for. It's not just a cause and an ideal, it's abstract. It's very, very concrete. But what I was saying was we live in an anti-intellectual civilization that rarely wants to raise certain kinds of questions, especially questions that will force us to examine ourselves, our society, and the world. So we begin with Socratic note doing what? Accenting forms of dogma, forms of parochialism, forms of provincialism. Dogma like free market fundamentalism. The fetishing of the unregulated market, ascribing magical powers to something created by human beings, but people act as if it falls from heaven with salvific effect. So deregulate, privatize, become the mantra over and over again, and we lose sight of substantive conceptions of public interest, the glue that holds us together, of common good, the very thing that allows us to be connected in any substantive way. You see. And a free market fundamentalism resulting in what? Unbelievable, obscene levels of wealth inequality. 1% of Americans now own 48% of the net financial wealth. That's oligarchic, plutocratic, to some degree still pigmentocratic. It's true. You got Sister Oprah and Brother Robert Johnson and others floating at the top, and God bless them, they worked hard, but at the same time, they're part of a structural inequality that goes hand in hand with losing sight of the fact that 20% of all of America's children live in poverty, in the richest nation in the history of the world. That is a moral disgrace. 39% of brown children, 37% of black, and let's not forget the red children, the indigenous peoples, 47% of their children living in poverty. There is an escalating race inequality that results more and more in disinvestment from cities, most of those cities chocolate, into suburbs, most of those suburbs vanilla, though not exclusively. Decrepit schools, unavailable health care and health care insurance, hard to obtain child care, not enough jobs with a living wage, working people treated as if they're simply disposable commodities to be calculated in light of a profit margin where most of the profit remains at the top of management and CEO level. What is it now? $301 for every dollar CEO to the average worker. It's called corporate greed. And it's corporate greed, why? Because when the demos, those Sly Stone call everyday people, or the late great James Cleveland called ordinary people, when their voices are not heard, when the National Negro Anthem, Lift Every Voice, does not take place, there's no structures of accountability for those on the top. And when there's no structures of accountability for those on the top, greed usually runs amok. And there's always certain saints in every group, class, and so forth. So that even among the well-to-do, you get those who say, well, I just like to make money. To make money, I want to give it all back. And that's a beautiful thing. I am deeply moved by charity. I am. Bill Gates and Melinda Gates and others give $100 million for malaria. I say I'm moved by it. But I don't confuse charity with justice. You have to talk about the structural inequality that allowed you to gain access to that kind of wealth. And think about it on the global scale. The 3 richest individuals in the world have more wealth than the bottom 47 countries. What are they going to say about us 100 years from now, 150 years from now? The top 225 individuals have more wealth than 47% of all of humankind. You're talking about 6.1 billion brothers and sisters of all colors. What kind of world are we bequeathing to the precious children? Well, we begin then with this dogma. It's a profoundly anti-democratic dogma operating in the precious experiment in democracy called the USA, free market fundamentalism, and very few have been willing to contest it, to examine it, to scrutinize it.